as folks who are involved in the effort, you have a right to know why I'm running and what I am passionate about seeing as a working change in North Carolina. You probably have already thought about all these issues yourself, and it's just going to ring a bell when I mention it. But we have got to make positive changes. We've got to change the leadership of our state legislature so that we can begin again to make progress on public education in our schools. We've got to pay our teachers fairly, to keep them, and to encourage them, to help them to focus on their job instead of working 2 or 3 jobs on the weekends in their spare time. We also have to have the resources at every school so that every child gets the opportunities that they need to succeed. And then we have to go beyond. We have to make sure that our community colleges are ready to receive graduates and help them prepare for a career. And our university system is ready to have affordable education for the students that go on to a 4-year degree or beyond. We have to change the health care situation in our state. We have an enormous coverage gap, and we have rising costs that are hammering everything. So I am committed to closing the health care coverage gap in North Carolina, protecting coverage for people who have it, you know, that pre-existing conditions thing that is under threat again from the other side, and making sure that we address cost control for everyone. So education, healthcare, the environment. We all depend on clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and we want a green land to enjoy. We also have to address the bigger picture, longer scale problems that the other side often claims don't even exist, and if it exists, we don't have to worry about it, and that is the global crisis of a changing climate. We have to make sure that economic opportunity is provided not just to the folks that already have means, but everyone. And we have seen the kind of widening gap between the haves and the have-nots across our society and in North Carolina from the focus on remedies that, when it comes down to it, frankly, only benefit the folks who already have. Did you read the article about stocks in the Journal today?
Yes.
I was shocked, frankly, by how extreme the numbers have become. But according to the Federal Reserve, at the end of the third quarter of 2019, more than 50% of the stocks traded in America are owned by the top 1% of income families. Over 50%. The bottom 50%, less than 1%. So it's great to have a rising stock market, but that's just not reaching most of our people. We have got to make sure that we put in place, those tools that will help everyone, and especially working families who are getting the short end of the stick now. We have to have an increase in the minimum wage. Effectively, it's been running backwards for years. It's still at $7.25 an hour.
Wow.
It's ridiculous. It's absurd. And for serving staff, it's even less. So, we need to kick that up fast in a major way. We also need to focus on remedies that will help working families take advantage of the opportunities that are there, but they can't effectively access. They have to have health care, that's a big one. They have to have access to educational opportunities that don't leave them in a family debt crisis for decades. We have to focus on making sure that our infrastructure is not crumbling, and it's there to provide the transportation, the water and sewer, the basics for everyone, all neighborhoods, all communities. And we have to protect those things that are under increasing threat from retrograde social movements, that is human and civil rights. They've been under threat across the board for years now. It's only intensifying, and we have to protect those. So that is a rundown of the things that are on the top of my priority list. And I'm always pleased to get the heads nodding and people saying yes. I'm going down those. But it's been pointed out to me that I can't just go into the wonky details of policy. that people also deserve not just to hear about what my priorities are, but why I'm personally passionate about some of those things. And I could tell you, on any one of those, what really got me concerned and committed and passionate about those. But I've talked with a number of people here this evening who are involved in healthcare and the helping professions in the medical field and the support professions for that. So maybe I'll just use that as the example and not burn up too much of your time. I'm in pretty good health now. Yeah, I'm 65, but at 65 I'm still in good health and vigorous. I've been a long distance runner for decades. That's helped me avoid some of the chronic problems that the sort of the aging human body is subject to, and we have to do more to ward off. But I wasn't always that way. I grew up in Hickory, which at the time was a much smaller town in North Carolina. It was less than 20,000 people when I was a kid growing up there in the 60s. And at the time it was still an industrial community. The economy there was dominated by textiles and furniture manufacturing. And most of my family at one time or another worked in the furniture plant nearby. And our house was three doors down the street from the nearest hosiery mill. I remember falling asleep at night to the sound of the second shift going. When I was a little kid, that was a comforting sound. So this was not a wealthy neighborhood. And I knew people, played with people, grew up with people who didn't have the benefits of a high wealth, family. When I was a kid, I was one of the kids that had health challenges. I think by the time I started the elementary school, there was no public kindergarten at that time in Hickory. By the time I started first grade, I'd had serious pneumonia at least twice. I had caught every childhood disease, through that time and through the end of what's now middle school. I caught every childhood disease you could shake a stick at, measles, mumps, chicken pox, you name it, I got it. But my parents were both working, and by the time I hit middle school, it was junior high back then, but by the time I hit middle school, they were both working in jobs that provided health care coverage. My mother was a teacher, public school teacher, and principal, ultimately, in Hickory. And my father worked for the Employment Security Commission in North Carolina, helping people find jobs. So I had access to care even when I was a little kid, and as I continued to sort of grow out of childhood health problems in subsequent years. Not everybody did. I could tell you honestly that I probably would have died several times before I got to elementary school had we not had access to a doctor in a hospital. Not all my neighbors are so lucky. There were two of my best friends that lived just literally for a kid a stone's throw away, and they had an older sister. Beverly was her name. I didn't know Beverly as well as I knew Gina and Buzz, but she was, one a little older, but one of the neighborhood kids, and I knew her growing up. When I got things like the measles and the mumps and the chicken pox, I had good care, I recovered. They didn't have that. Their family was, they worked, but they were really on the poor side. Beverly got the measles, she died.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And of course, today we have immunizations. A lot fewer people catch these contagious diseases than it used to. At the time, we didn't have those. So when it was going around, you were catching it, but if you had good care, you'd mostly recover. They didn't, she didn't. At the time, I didn't realize that had to be because of the difference in access to care. And I went through high school and college and law school, passionate about some other things that are still important. Education, clean air and water, some other stuff. But I didn't realize what there was in terms of a gap in healthcare coverage in the state. So I spent most of a decade working as a legal aid attorney on the coast of North Carolina. And routinely, whether they came in because they were having a landlord-tenant dispute, couldn't pay the rent, landlord wasn't fixing anything, or whether they came in because they'd been laid off from work and were looking for help getting their unemployment benefits, their situation was almost always complicated by their access or lack thereof to health care. I can remember one couple that came in because he'd been laid off from his job, the husband, and I was trying to help him get unemployment benefits. We eventually did, but at the moment, he'd lost a job, they'd lost their income, no health care, and they couldn't even, well, I'll tell you in a minute. It was obvious, the wife was with him, and it was obvious in the interview that she was in pain. And finally, I couldn't stand anymore. I said, ma'am, I'm sorry, but is there something that we can help you with? It's obvious that you're really uncomfortable. And they couldn't even afford to buy her arthritis medicine, and that was the problem. I had a big bottle of aspirin that I was able to give them on the spot, and they were embarrassingly grateful for just that little bit of help. And that sort of that was one of the things that alerted me to how many of my clients had that issue of no resources, couldn't afford even the most basic health care. Had another elderly African-American couple who came in, they wanted help protecting their home and little farm that they had out in the countryside. And they needed the help, as it turned out, because they had tens of thousands of dollars that they owed the main hospital in town. Not for their care, but because their son, who had been working, ran afoul of a serious illness, and he got the treatment at the local hospital, and they signed for it. And now they were standing to lose their home and their farm that they'd had in their not very, well, in their poor family for generations because of that. Now, at the time, I know that some of you will have heard of the Hill-Burton Act. That was passed decades ago to help hospitals either build or expand. It was federal funding, and it came with some strings attached permanently. The hospital had to provide a certain amount of charitable care, and they had to work with anybody who couldn't afford to pay their bill for either, write it off or do a plan that they could actually afford without hardship. Took that to the local hospital, pointed out that they were in violation of the Hill-Burton Act, and we got that dealt with that way. Okay. But that only applied to the hospitals. It didn't apply to the doctors. So, like I said, I was turning around with almost case after case, seeing places where it was the basic problem of the family was the healthcare access, even if they were having another problem that triggered the immediate crisis. But that's when I started, arguing for Medicaid expansion, and why I have been so outraged beyond words that the dang fools running the North Carolina state legislature now have turned away $2 billion a year of our own tax money that we have paid into the federal government that we could have back and provide coverage for over 500,000 North Carolinians. I don't know how many of them already in working families. We're not talking about layabouts. We're talking about people who don't get it because they're not that, sort of absolute, completely dirt poor, no job, no resources, that they're eligible under these current very strict rules that North Carolina still, incredibly has in place. And, our so-called leaders won't take the money to expand and provide the care for the other folks that need it. First thing we're going to change once we change control of the General Assembly, I think almost literally the first bill that a lot of us are going to do everything within our power to jam through is lifting that so that we can work with the decent governor that we have there, a human to get that gap covered. And there's like 20,000 people right here in Forsyth County who fall into that gap. It's estimated statewide that about 1,000 people a year die prematurely because of that. So this is a life or death issue. And once you understand, that's one of the things, once you see it, you can't unsee it, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of thing that, gets me so mad that I'm willing to, raise money and go out and knock on doors to try to get a change. And that's the kind of change that we can work together to create, once we change the leadership of the state legislature. So that's, I know that I could go on with the stories and examples, but you've all got other things to do, so I want to sort of wrap it there. If anybody's got a burning question they want to kick around, I'm happy to do it either in the group or individually afterwards. But I'll wrap up at this point. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone again, and I just wanted to give you a couple of wrap-up details. I had a couple questions about everyone's favorite, writing checks. And I just wanted to say, for those of you who have already contributed either online or tonight, thank you very much. If you're still waiting for that opportunity or haven't been sure how to go about it, you may make a check out to Dan Besse for NC House. And if you need me to repeat that or whatever, we can do that. I'm not going anywhere. And if you'd like to give cash, there's a $50 a day limit. So just keep that in mind, but otherwise I'll be here. And last but not least, I have our clipboard from our sign-in. We had a couple of pages of sign-in, so thank you everyone who got to that. If you have not, I would love to get your name, phone number, and email to stay in touch. And thank you and follow up and get you on our email list. We have a lot of great social, volunteer, and critical need opportunities coming up in the next few months especially. So if you haven't gotten a chance to sign this, please do, and I'll follow up with everyone and get you plugged in. So like Dan said, if you have any questions, please, we're both here. He's really the one. But if you have any questions for me, I'm here as well. And thank you so much again. Please enjoy yourselves. And at the risk of sounding over emotional, this really means a lot to me personally, to us both. So thank you so much for being here tonight.